calling the tolerance question or tolerance questions. Okay, let me just ask: would you agree with me when I say that the issue of tolerance has been elevated to a very high level of importance in our culture? I mean, are we on board with that? Okay, it seems to me, and I mean, I'm only one person looking at this culture, but I do try to look at it as the best I can, and it seems to me that tolerance has been elevated to virtually to the level of our say cardinal virtue, our ultimate moral virtue. Because if you don't have too many other things that can stand as principles to violate or not violate, well, then you turn to something like this. And as I mentioned before, sometimes it's even turned into a bedrock objective moral principle. But whatever the case, tolerance seems to be very important in that way. And that raises a number of different questions, because tolerance, of course, can be interpreted different ways. And it can actually, in my view, actually become a little bit dangerous at times as well. So we need some really clear thinking. And here's one area where I think we as Christians can be of service to people in our society. If we can think through the issue of tolerance very carefully and recognize, hey, there's some value here. But let's make sure we're thinking clearly and carefully about tolerance, because it can be abused. Virtually anything can be abused. Even something as good as tolerance can be abused. And when they are abused, well, how about I put it this way? Have you ever heard anybody say this? There's no one quite as intolerant as a person who's intolerant in the name of tolerance. How's that? Think about that. That's when it becomes very powerful. And we need to think about, how do we get there? What do we mean with this term? So we have the tolerance question here, and I want to move to this question right here. Here's a question we asked this morning, and I'd like us to focus on it right now for a couple of minutes as well. Can I live out my morals without others thinking I'm intolerant? And I mean my morals. I mean my morals as a Christian, my moral convictions as a Christian. Can I live those out in our culture without others thinking I'm intolerant? Now, can I have you turn to the person around you and answer this yes or no, and why? Take a couple, 3 minutes on this. Because as you can see here for the groups, I'm saying, can we do this? Is this possible to do this in our culture? What do you think? Yes or no? Why not? And then I've got a second question I'm going to come to in just a second for the group discussion. I'll wait about 2 minutes and I'll put that one up on the screen as well. But answer this one if you can among yourselves for just a moment. Is the answer yes? Is it no? Why not? Why would you say this? Okay, go ahead. Okay, could I just have you look up on the screen for just 1 second? I want you to carry on in those groups. But how about this? Look at this question. Can I live out my morals without others thinking I'm intolerant? I'm wondering if there's kind of a built-in assumption there that intolerance is always bad. Tolerance is always good. In the way I asked the question. Think about that. Is this true? Is intolerance always a bad thing? Is tolerance always good? And answer that one among yourselves for just a moment or two. And why? Why would you answer yes or no? Do that among yourselves for a second, and then we'll push on. Okay? Just carry on where you were, but if you can think about this as an assumption behind it. Thanks. Okay, can we have your attention here? I'd like to see what are we saying about these two questions here. Let's go back to that first one for a moment. Can you do it? Can you live out your moral values and convictions in our society without being considered intolerant? What do you think? Is that possible? Okay. What's that? Depends on with whom. Okay, that's a very good qualifier right there. What were you going to say, sir? Yeah.
Clarification of the question: can I live out Christian morals without being seen as intolerant? Can I speak out?
Yeah. Okay.
So that living out Christian values would not be so.
Okay.
When speaking comes out.
Okay, so you can live out. It's one thing to do that, another thing to speak out. Okay, when I'm thinking about living out or expressing, I guess I'm kind of thinking, including that as well. I'm wondering about that. Is it possible to do that without being considered intolerant? Is there a way to express your point of view in this culture and to live out and express your Christian moral convictions without being considered intolerant by others? Okay. Anybody want to comment on why that is, or is your hand up here? Yeah. Okay. We don't have control over what people think. That's a really key idea here. We can't determine other people's reactions to us. Now, having said that, are there some things you can do to mitigate that, to come across in a way that doesn't at least promote a response of that guy's intolerant, that person's intolerant? Is there anything we can do about that? Yeah.
Well, I think if you have a relationship with someone, you build a friendship.
Okay.
And they genuinely know that you care about them.
Yeah.
Then when you give God's viewpoint, you say, you know, God, you're God of love. But this is what you just said. If they can feel the pull and love, I think that, and you have friendship.
Yeah. So by building a friendship, we can at least go a ways toward mitigating that, you're saying. Okay? That's interesting the way we're putting this, because the point is when we express a point of view, the Christian point of view on certain things, it may well lead to people thinking we're intolerant. I mean, it just may well. Okay? Now, I've got an interesting guy in my classes. His name is Dan. He's in his 50s. Very, very passionate Christian. He shares a lot. Shares with everybody. He's a musician, and so he spends a lot of his life with people who are not Christians. And he's a very nice guy, but he's also very passionate too at the same time. and he really loves and cares for people. And he was telling me just a little bit ago that he's got one friend. He has had his friend for a long time. And the friend has been so fed up with Christians in the last little bit, he's pretty much written off. He's gone through his life one by one to get rid of everybody in his life who's a Christian. Get rid of that person, get rid of that person. He said they're all gone. He doesn't want anything to do with Christianity whatsoever. He says there's one friend, though, he's hanging on to. Dan says, and that's me. Dan said that. He says, the only thing I can think of is because he really does know I care for him. I really do care for him. He's been a friend for a long, long time. And that really spoke to me. I thought, okay, now here's this person who is really willing to call Christians intolerant. Probably believes many are. But he's willing to hang on to Dan because deep down he really believes Dan's a guy who cares for him. Dan hasn't changed his views on one thing at all. Period. His positions, and that's an interesting thing for us to think about. So I mean that I put this question here for us to think about. How about that second part? Is intolerance always bad? Tolerance always good? What are we thinking here? How about that? No to both of those? No to both. Okay, see, that's good. We're going to come to that a bit later on. Would we all agree with that? That sometime intolerance is a perfectly fine thing, and maybe we ourselves end up having to be intolerant. What some of this is going to come down to is, what do these words mean? Okay, and I appreciate your thoughts on that. Let me ask you this, because the question I'm getting at here is this: is tolerance necessarily, or put it this way, I should say this: is intolerance necessarily something we should be trying to avoid at all costs? Is intolerance necessarily bad in all cases? Okay? And see, we can even think more about this. Let me ask you this question. Are we as Christians sometimes said to be intolerant? We've already addressed that. And the answer to that is, well, yeah, we sometimes are. We're said that to be that. Well, when are Christians sometimes said to be intolerant? Tell me if I'm wrong when I say this is when it sometimes seems to happen. When we as Christians find ourselves in a position where we feel compelled to oppose something. Is that not right? When something runs up against our convictions as Christians, whether it be a government decision, maybe a court ruling, maybe a trend in society, maybe the practice of certain people, whatever it may be, something runs up against our convictions and we feel compelled to oppose it. And then it's sometimes said that we're being intolerant of people whose actions or views or lifestyles we disagree with. Is that not correct? That probably is when it happens. Well, here's why I think we need some really clear thinking on this question of tolerance. I'm just going to break it down into three questions that I think will help sort out what's going on here. We'll talk about each of them for a moment, and then we'll see if we can summarize, wrap it up here, and I'll be happy to have some comments from you as well. But the questions you have in front of you, but here's the first one. Why is tolerance so important in our culture? Why has it become such a buzzword, a powerfully important commodity in our culture? Because you see, it really is almost as if tolerance has become the new religion, isn't it? Almost like the new sacred cow in our culture. As I mentioned a moment ago, it's been elevated almost to that level of supreme virtue. You know, Chuck Colson, most of you will know the name Chuck Colson, who died just a couple of years ago. He wrote an article, actually entitled, "Can We Be Good Without God?" You'll find it on the internet. And in that article, he made the statement, "We exalt tolerance, not truth, as an ultimate value." And I think he was reading culture correct when he said that. And the question is, if that's correct, well then why do we do that? And that's a question that I've thought about over the years. What is it about tolerance and what is it about our culture that has caused us to elevate tolerance to such a high level? Okay, well, some of you know the name Alan Bloom. He died now a while back, just a bit ago, but he's an American philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Closing of the American Mind. Anybody here ever heard of that book? It was a fairly big name book a number of years ago, and he talks about this exact issue in the book, and I think he gives us some real insight here. And he made this a couple of points in the book I just want to share with you because I think they really help us here. He said this. He said, when university students come to university, it's just exactly the same we read from that other philosopher a little bit ago or earlier in the session. When they come to university, virtually all believe that truth is a relative thing. So here I am as a university professor, they come into my classes and virtually all believe it. And he says they believe it to the point they just take it for granted. Truth is relative. The idea is that you can have your truth, I can have my truth, there's many truths out there. It's just a fundamental thing for them. He said that if you question it, they'll wonder, what in the world's going on? Why would you question something so obvious and so basic as that? And as he says, as far as most of these students are concerned, that other idea of truth that says one view is true and the opposite false, that's actually not just rejected, but it's feared as the enemy. It's feared as something that is dangerous. In other words, to go around and saying, this view is true and that view is false, that's considered to be a dangerous idea. Now, I read that and I thought, well, what would make it dangerous? Well, Alan Bloom went on to say, because in the minds of many young people in this culture, that attitude, this view is correct and that one is false, which is a little bit like saying, I'm right and you're wrong. It leads people to say, I'm right and you're wrong. Okay? That's what causes some of the biggest problems we have in the world. Problems like wars and bigotry and narrow-mindedness and imperialism and stuff like this. These big problems we have in the world. And so Alan Bloom said, you know what the new goal is for many young people in our culture? It's not to find truth, to figure out what the truth is so we can really get it right. That's not the goal. You know what the goal is? To get rid of the idea of truth altogether. Just eliminate it. Get rid of it. And pursue what in its place? Tolerance, just what we have up here. So truth becomes something we reject, and in its place becomes tolerance. So the result is we have truth versus tolerance. You see what I'm saying? Truth is set in opposition to tolerance. So you need to make the decision, are you going to be a person who accepts truth and elevates truth? Or are you going to be a person who accepts and elevates tolerance? Because it's one or the other. These are mutually exclusive in the minds of many, many people. And of course, when that happens, of course, objective truth often is what is rejected. Tolerance wins out, especially in religion and ethics and that kind of thing. And so they become personal, private, subjective matters. The name of the game is to be tolerant toward all ethical points of view. You see the point there? That's what Alan Bloom's getting at. He says, so with many, many people say for the good of society, we need to get rid of this idea of truth. It's just been the foundation. The foundation has caused many big problems in the world. Get rid of it. Pursue tolerance, openness. He called it, as well as tolerance instead. Now, let me go to the second question here. That's one reason why it's become such a buzzword. But let's go to this question: what is true tolerance? This is about as important a question as I think we could get to here. How should we think about this term? Well, we could even have a group discussion on this. We won't do it now, but I mean, it's a great issue to have a group discussion on at some point. Because here's where I'd like you can tell me if I'm wrong when I say this. Think through this with me. And today, am I wrong in saying in today's culture that tolerance has come to mean agreement? It's kind of what you were getting at earlier, okay? To be tolerant means to affirm something, to endorse something, to embrace something. That's how we're tolerant toward that thing. You see what I'm getting at? And so the way to be tolerant towards something is to agree with it. Okay? And the reason I say this is because here's what I've seen. That when people speak out against certain views or practices or lifestyles, they're almost always immediately labeled intolerant. Why? Because they've stated their disagreement with that, and that's what makes them intolerant. Which means, of course, that the way to be tolerant would have been to agree with it. Tolerance becomes agreement. Now, I think we need some really clear thinking about this. Is this a coherent, proper way of looking at the word tolerance? The tolerance is agreement. Well, you know, I think, I heard a Christian philosopher, Dr. William Lane Craig, speak on this issue a number of years back. And he said something which I really picked up on that day, and it really helped clarify this for me. He made this statement, and you tell me if you think he was right, because I think he was, but you tell me what you think. He said, tolerance, he says, there's a deep misunderstanding going on here with that view of tolerance. He says, tolerance does not require us to agree with all views. In fact, he said this, tolerance requires disagreement. How about that? Tolerance requires disagreement. And he said this, if you agree with something, if I agree with something, do I need to tolerate it? I agree with it already. It makes no sense to talk about me tolerating something I already agree with. I appreciate it, I agree with it, so I don't need to tolerate it. Tolerance is an attitude which says, I actually disagree with something you're saying or you're doing. I think it's wrong. But I respect your right to say it or to do it. I accept your right to say it or to do it. That's what it means to be tolerant. Does that make sense? I think that's a really, really key idea. And I think once we have that view and this idea in mind, we are much more prepared for a decent, honest discussion of what we're getting at here. Okay? So the tolerance does not mean agreement. Tolerance requires disagreement, and it's an attitude which says, I actually disagree with something you're saying or doing, but I am willing to tolerate it. In other words, I'm willing to accept your right to say or do it. That's what it means to tolerate it. Okay? But let's go to the third question here, and then we can certainly have some time to discuss this a little bit if we have whatever time we have here. The question is this: should we be tolerant? Are Christians called to be tolerant? Okay, well, I'm not sure how you'd answer that question. Let me give you my unambiguous answer. Yes and no. Okay? That's my answer, okay? I sometimes say that's a good Canadian answer, yes and no. But anyway, I'll tell you why I say that. Let me take the yes part first. Yes, we are. Why do I say that? I say tolerance is required when we think about it the way we did it just a moment ago. It's required from us for at least two reasons here. And the first one is simply this: we're all imperfect and we're all infallible. We're all fallible. This is a really foundational point of Christian theology. If there's anybody who should be saying this, it's Christians who study their Bibles and their theology. We are fallen people and we're fallible people. By fallen, it just simply means we've been affected, influenced by moral impurity in our entire beings. We have biases, we all do. We have mixed motives as we weigh data, we sort through issues. Sometimes we actually want certain things to be true as we're weighing through the data. So we're not perfectly objective or any of that kind of thing. We're fallen, and we're also fallible at the best of times. In other words, as the Apostle Paul put it, right now we see through a glass darkly at the best of times. We don't have the perfect clear vision. We don't always have all the information, the long-range perspective. We don't know all the possible outcomes of our decisions. There's so many things we don't know. We're fallen and we're fallible, which means we don't always attain and know the truth in every single subject, which means it just makes sense to welcome others' expressions and different points of view and hear what they have to say. Okay? Now, I just want to really be clear here, though. This does not mean there's not objective truth out there. This just means others may have different points of view on what the truth is on any given subject, and we may not always achieve it dead on, but we're looking for the truth on matters. And this just means it makes sense to welcome others' points of view on that. But there's another reason why I'm saying tolerance is required. I think as Christians we should actually be leaders in advocating tolerance when we think of it the way we're talking about here. Because you have to ask this question: what stake do we as Christians have in crushing tolerance? Why? I mean, what's in it for the kingdom of God, for the gospel of Jesus, to crush tolerance? Suppose we ever could. We're not in a position to do that in our culture right now anyway, but suppose we ever could. Because, you see, we know that people don't come into the kingdom of God by force, do they? They don't come in by coercion. How do they come in? They don't experience true change of heart that way. They come in as we draw them and as the Spirit draws them. And I find it really intriguing that when you look at the book of Romans, chapter 2 and verse 4, it says, even God is said to be tolerant. This is this is an English translation, but it's still an interesting way to put it. It says, in Romans 2:4, it says God's kindness, His tolerance, His patience are His ways of leading us to repentance. So, I guess you have to ask the question, if by tolerance we're saying, I disagree with some things you're saying or doing, but I will accept your right, I will allow you to go ahead and do those, then you have to ask the question, is God tolerant? Well, my answer to that is, well, look around. Look around in our world. There must be a lot of things, many, many things He is tolerating. He's not approving, He's tolerating. For the time being, that is. Okay? And it says here, His kindness, His tolerance, His patience are His ways of leading us to repentance. I would just think that giving people the liberty to express various points of view is really doing nothing more than simply respecting their dignity to function as the free agents, the free moral agents God made them to be. It also, guess what it does? Gives us the opportunity to engage them in dialogue. And that is what we as Christians have been called to do. Engage others in respectful dialogue. Now, that's why I'm saying the yes part to answer this question, should we be tolerant? Yes, for that reason. How about the no part? Okay? Well, what I mean by this is simply not toward everything. And you know what? I don't think I'm saying anything very profound on this part. I think that probably, even throughout our society, most people, even in a society that elevates tolerance to a very high level, most people recognize that there's a legitimate intolerance towards certain things. Have you seen those billboards? Or those bumper stickers that will say zero tolerance toward, and then they'll fill in the blank with something? What do we fill in the blank with? What are some examples? Zero tolerance towards what? Abuse. Certain kinds of abuse, you betcha?
Drinking and driving.
Drinking and driving, that's one for sure. Okay, I bet there's some out there that say texting at the moment. Zero tolerance to texting? I don't know, but I bet there are. I don't think I've ever seen that one, but I bet that's out there. How about, I've seen zero tolerance of deadbeat dads. I've seen that one. And there's others like that. What are we saying here? We're saying that even in a society in which we value tolerance, we raise it to a very high level, we recognize that we ought not to be tolerant toward everything. There is a legitimate intolerance against certain things, like theft, like rape, like child abuse, like attacks on women or attacks on anybody, really. And I heard a speaker named Dr. John Patrick. Anybody here ever heard him speak? A medical doctor from Toronto. I'd be surprised if somebody in this room hadn't heard him. Yeah, we got one here at least. Interesting guy. Okay, and he and I have spoken together at a number of different places, so we have a little bit of a friendship here over the years. But one of the very first times I've heard him speak, somehow the issue of tolerance came up. And he's done a lot of work, medical work in Africa. And he's seen the way they do things, the values in Africa, and how they're lived out, and the way patients are treated, how young boys are treated versus how young girls are treated, etc. Then he come over to Canada. He says stuff that would just be taken as normal here and not taken normal over there, and vice versa. And he has a lot to say about that kind of thing. And then he made the point here. He talked about tolerance and intolerance. And he said, here's a quote from him, "Women are safer in any society when that society has no tolerance for attacks on them." It doesn't mean there never will be attacked, but it means they're safer when the society as a whole has no tolerance, a zero tolerance. Children are safer when the society has no tolerance for any attacks on them. And we could add to that, homeless people. We go on with that. What's the point here? It seems to me the point is something like this, that the fundamental things in society, things we hold dear, things like justice and safety and love and fidelity and honor and liberty and life itself, these things, how do we protect them? We protect them by an intolerance against anything that would destroy them. We protect them by an intolerance against anything that would violate them. So there most definitely is a legitimate intolerance towards certain things. Now, by way of conclusion here, let me just wrap this up this way. What should we do? Are Christians supposed to be tolerant? Well, we gave a yes and no answer to that. Here's what I think we should do. Number one, we speak the truth in love. Ephesians 4:15, which is exactly what the verse says, which implies to me that there is real truth. We should seek it. We should speak it. Whatever we say about tolerance, there is real truth. And I think we should challenge this notion that it has to be either truth or tolerance. That notion has to be challenged. Tolerance, when we define it the proper way, can coexist with truth. In fact, it ought to. So we speak the truth in love, which implies there is real truth. We should seek it. We should speak it. Number two, we should accept others' rights to do the same. In our culture. That's how we create dialogue. And that will then give us opportunity to communicate the truth to others. And that's God's chosen way of drawing people to Himself. That's how God draws people to Himself, by us having dialogue with them. So that will give us the opportunity. And then number three, wrapping it up, we protect what we hold dear by a legitimate intolerance of things that would destroy those things. What do you say about this? Any comments or questions? Let's just take a few minutes like we did last time for anything anybody wants to add. These are basic principles, and now these all have to be applied on different issues. But I find nothing more important in my thinking than to get clear on the basic concepts, which is what we're trying to do here today, and so we can apply them. Yes, and I'm going to try to repeat these answers, these questions, I should say, for everybody else. Yes, go ahead.
Well, it seems like a lot of what you're saying is that we're respecting the dignity and rights of people.
Yeah.
And so the yes is all to loving people, and the no is to not tolerating sin.
Yeah, not tolerating. Yeah, I guess that's exactly. Well, not tolerating sin, not tolerating certain kind. That's for sure. Yeah, I guess so. Maybe it could be. I'll have to think about that a bit further, but that could be. Yeah, I'm look at my notes again after that. Yeah, thank you. Yes, right here. Yes.
You just said that you would challenge the notion of what?
Remember I said before that in our culture often many people have come to the conclusion that it has to be tolerance versus truth. It's one or the other. Because if you stand for truth, then that'll make you intolerant. And if you want to be tolerant, you're going to have to get rid of truth altogether. That's what Alan Bloom found in his research, and found that many people have come to in our culture. And I'm saying, no, once we understand what tolerance really is, Tolerance is simply the view that says, I disagree with something you're saying or doing, but I accept your right to say or do it. We can still stand for the truth and still say, I believe what you're doing is mistaken, but I'll accept your right to do or to say it, but then now we need to dialogue, and I'll tell you why. And that does seem to me to be God's goal for us. But yeah, I'm saying we shouldn't accept, I don't think we should accept the notion that it has to be either truth or tolerance. I think we are called to both. I really do. And once we understand tolerance, the way we're talking about it here, and all we're really doing here is going back to the basic traditional idea of what it means to tolerate something. Okay, tolerance is sometimes called toleration. Okay? Yes, over here, yeah.
Think about, you're saying God tolerates certain things because He loves us. So I'm thinking of like Abraham having many wives.
Yeah.
Okay, so that wasn't God's plan from the beginning.
Right.
But God tolerated it, however, there were consequences.
Sure, yeah.
So we can sort of keep looking.
You better believe it. Okay. Yeah. Let me say here, what's your name, by the way? Linda. What Linda's saying here is that it's true that God will tolerate certain things, and he is doing that. And she's the example of Abraham having many wives. Okay, God tolerated that, but there were consequences of that. So you're saying keep looking and point out that there may be some things that God tolerates, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you escape free of consequences. That's a good point. I think that adds to what we've been saying here. Yes.
Speak to the meaning of grace with respect to tolerance, particularly your tolerance.
Yeah. Right. Well, see, that's an interesting question. The question is, can we speak to the meaning of grace, and especially as it applies and relates to tolerance? That's what you're getting at there, and how we exercise it. Because when you think of it, like, it's interesting to me that tolerance has been elevated to this very high level of a high level virtue in our culture. Tolerance is actually a fairly negative concept when you think about it. It's a negative term. And I had some students, a couple of students one of them particularly was not a Christian just a short time ago in a class I was teaching. And she made quite a big issue of this fact that tolerance, if that's all we're willing to give, we're willing to tolerate things, we should be doing more than that. Okay? Well, you can kind of see why she'd say that when you think of it, because tolerance just means I'll let it go. I'll tolerate it. Okay? I think that what we need to do as Christians is, that's what we need to do. We do, technically that is what we do. There's certain things we disagree with, so we're not going to celebrate them, even though some people might wish we did. We're not going to celebrate them, but maybe we'll tolerate them, we'll allow them. They're happening in our culture. We won't try to stop them, okay? But where grace comes in, I think, is in the attitude that we have when we interact with other people. Do we have a gracious attitude to people? And I think that goes back to the question we talked about earlier. Is it possible to do all of this without being considered intolerant in our culture? Well, fundamental point, one of you mentioned here, that we have no way of guaranteeing how other people will react to what we do. So what they do, okay? But I will say this. If we come to people and they are expecting a negative, self-righteous, judgmental attitude, which is exactly what they will probably be expecting, by the way. That's just so commonly what you hear, and that's what they're expecting. And what they hear from you is a person who stands for the principles, but does it in a way that's gracious and shows a real care and concern for that person. They can't escape the fact that you really care for them. And you're doing it in a gracious way. You know what you'll have done? You'll have made it harder and harder for them to label you as an intolerant person. They may still label you as that. You can't guarantee what they do. But we'll make it harder and harder to do that. And I think that is ultimately our goal. So there's a stereotype they have in mind, and we need to confuse that stereotype. They're expecting a negative reaction. They're expecting a judgmental attitude. And what do they get from us? A caring, gracious attitude, which still stands on the principles that we believe are good. Because you know why? We believe those principles are good for everybody. So why wouldn't we stand on them? We do stand on them, because they come from the creator of all life, the one who designed. And so we stand on those principles. And that's where I think the graciousness comes in. And so what we do, a whole different lecture I give, I have a point there called, make it difficult for people to label you an intolerant person. And because that's all you have control over. Me, I have control over what I do. You have control over what you do. But make it difficult for them to say, well, yeah, those Christians out there, they seem like an intolerant bunch, but boy, the couple of Christians I've been meeting lately, they sure didn't come across that way. That's what I'd love to hear people say. That'd be great. Yes, right here. Yeah.
Something that I had an employee that
working under me.
She became
She's transgender.
transgender, yeah.
Female and switched to male.
Yeah, okay.
And was afraid to approach me because she knew that I was
Oh, yeah.
Christian.
Yeah.
And I just simply explained to them that although I don't agree with their choice and that biblically I feel it's incorrect, it's still their choice and that they're going to have to make that decision one day. Like they'll have that discussion with God one day and it'll be between them and God.
You're right,
I'm not
okay.
going to judge them. But I have to look at people that we don't agree with and the intolerance. We're still instructed to love our neighbors.
Right.
And God loves that person as his child no matter what they're doing because he oversees us.
Yeah, yeah.
So, we just need to love on people around us, whether we agree or disagree.
Right.
That they make.
Yeah, that's very interesting, your approach is really interesting. I mean, we as Christians are in the middle. We don't really know how to deal with this stuff at the moment, and there's different people who take different approaches to that. There's about 5 or 6 things that come to my mind when you share that story, but I think it's just most important to say, what are the foundational things I can do in that situation? What am I supposed to do? Well, number one, I know I'm called to love all people. The second greatest commandment: love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, love the Lord your God, love your neighbor as yourself. I know I'm called to do that. And it doesn't say unless he's gay or unless he's transgender or something like that. It doesn't say that. Okay? So we are called to love the person that way. I remember hearing Billy Graham speak about this. Okay? And being interviewed on this a number of years back. I thought he was always so wise in how he handled these things. And somebody asked him about gay relationships and things like that. And Billy Graham just said, from the Bible, I would have to say that homosexual activity is immoral, but he says there are many other things that are immoral as well. He mentioned a whole bunch of them. And he said, well, we're called upon, here's what's fundamental to me, we're called upon to love those people who are gay. So the person, and this was a non-Christian interviewer, and they said, so you're saying that if you had a child who was gay, you would not love that child any less? And Billy just like this said, probably more. I thought, now here's a guy who's got this thing figured out. Okay? And that's what we are called upon to do, and that's really, really an important point. And we're not actually in the Christian community that good at doing this with people who are involved in things that we really believe are illegit, are wrong in some way. I got a student who is very involved in interacting with atheists and Mormons and groups like that. He spends a lot of time with them, hours and hours. He's my TA. We work together on a lot of things. And he came to me just a short time ago and he said, what I'm finding from talking to the Mormon missionaries, the young men who spend 2 years doing their missionary stint, he said, by the time they're done, they've had so much hostility and unfriendliness thrown at them by the Christian community. They've had so many doors slammed in their face. They've all just come to the conclusion that this is just a hostile group. They have no place for any of us. And he said, same thing you said. He said, if Christian people would just love those Mormon missionaries, so just do that. It would make it a lot easier for guys like me to have conversations with them when I get the chance. Because I'm starting way back, about 10 steps back, because they just think we all hate them. Well, believe it or not, I was talking with some Mormon missionaries just a short time ago. And then as we got going, they said, well, what do you do? And I said, I teach at Trinity Western. Trinity Western, they hate us. First thing out of their mouth. What? Who hates you? Are you talking about faculty or are you talking about? No, students. I said, well, okay, there's 4,000 students. I don't know what all the students do. Some students may have mistreated you. I don't know. You will not find faculty there that hate you. I can pretty well guarantee you. I don't. But here, look what I'm doing. I'm starting back again. Because somehow or other, we have this way of doing this. I don't know what it is we're doing here. But with people who are walking down some road that we disagree with, we end up not showing them love and grace. We show them just that very thing we talked about before. There's some kind of judgmental attitude or whatever it is. That's what they've come to expect out of us. And I just say, if we could confuse that stereotype, stand by the principles, but show them gracious attitude and let them know we really care for you. We're not doing this for any other reason. We care for you. You're friends of ours. We care for you. We care about you. If that can come across, so they at least say, now that person there, that maybe I find other Christians to be this way, but I don't find this one to be. I find this one to be, she's not like that, or he's not like that. That's what we got to be doing. And it just seems to me anybody should be able to love a person. That's something we all should be able to do. I always think one of the best examples Jesus ever gave us on dealing with a person who was caught up in an act of immorality was with the woman caught in adultery of John chapter 8. Just read that passage. Her immorality, her sin was not in question. She was caught in the act. Everybody knew. They bring her before Jesus. Where's the guy? Who knows? He didn't get brought before Jesus. The woman did. And of course, then they ask Jesus this question to try to trap him. Should we stone you, or should we stone this woman now or not? Knowing full well that the Roman law said they couldn't, and Moses' law said they should. So now Jesus was trapped. Okay, they were going to trap Jesus. So you know how the story goes. Okay, he said, "Well, go ahead and stone her, but let the one who is without sin among you cast the first stone, and then after that, everybody can pick up stones and start throwing them." And then he got down and he wrote in the sand. I don't know what he wrote. There's theories about what he might have written, but they're just speculation. And then he gets up and looks around. Nobody is there except for the woman. And then he says to her, "Where are they all? Did no one condemn you?" And she says, "No." And guess what he said? "Neither do I condemn you." Now, I tell you, I have getting my mind around that one. She was caught in the act. He's not condemning her. Well, I did read John 3, a bit before that says Jesus did not come to condemn the world. The world already stands condemned. He came that the world might be saved through him. Okay? And it seems to me he's putting that into practice in John chapter 8. But then he went ahead and after that said, "Go and sin no more. Go and leave your life of destructive behavior." So he was concerned about her action. And I thought, when you look at this, he's able to do two things, balancing two things, and I think we are really pretty bad at this. I mean, as a Christian community. Number one, no condemnation of the person, and no approval of the action. It seems to me we always go this way or that way. Jesus did both, and that should be our goal. No condemnation of the person, show the grace and show the caring, but no approval of the action. So because that action is not good for that person. So you call the person from that action, but at the same time, no condemnation of the person in general. And I thought, the guy who did that was Billy Graham when I watched him interviewed. So at least it was a person with the stature of Billy Graham doing it. And that was pretty exciting for me to watch that. But anyway, there's so many other things we could say about it, but I really think we need to have some of these principles in mind and begin putting them into practice with people just like this, because we're moving into a world in which there'll be all kinds of this kind of stuff going on around us. And our time's about gone. Any last one? Let's go. We got these two, and then we'll leave it at that. Right here, yes.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you said. And I'm just looking at Jude 3,
yeah,
where it says, "Contend for the faith, delivered to the saints." How do we balance that?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think you just do both at the same time. That's what we're called to do. We're called to take that same truth. We communicate that same truth. But I'm saying we do it in a gracious fashion, showing that we're doing this because we are concerned for people. And so if we really are concerned for people, that should come through in our attitude, in our everything we say. But we really are called to do that. That's one of my life verses, Jude 3. We're called to contend once for all, for the faith once for all delivered. We don't change it, we don't manipulate it, but we try to figure out how to do it in a way that's gracious like that. I think there's a way to do both. Yeah, good point. One more at the back, and this will be the benedictory question here.
Oh no.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there any place for public, I don't want to use the word protest, but
yeah.
I just struggle with the idea of some of the things that are coming at us in society.
Yeah.
If we kind of go down the road with a placard and say we don't like this thing, then people will just go, well, those guys are intolerant. Mm-hmm. Is there a place for public?
Well, you know what? I mean, this is just going to be a matter of opinion. My opinion, I don't think on this is worth any more than any of yours on this. It's an interesting question, isn't it? I think there is a place, but I think it needs to be used pretty carefully. When I see people protesting for the right to life of the unborn, I kind of appreciate that. Okay? These are the most vulnerable members of society. Nobody is more vulnerable than the unborn, because they're silent, they're out of sight, no one sees them, no one hears them. Okay? So if somebody's not going to stand up and say something, but then the question is, let's just make sure we do that in a way that it stands for the truth, but does so in a way that, can we do this graciously as well? Can we do this in a way that woman heading for that abortion doesn't feel she's being totally abused by Christians or somebody else who's standing in the way there? You see, then this is very difficult for us, okay? But I mean, that's somehow or other we need to figure out how to do that. You see, what it comes down to this is, can we proclaim what is right and what is good? Can we hold that up in our society? So because that's the deeper question. How do we do that? Because it seems to me that's what we as Christians have been called to do. A long time ago, I heard Carl F. H. Henry, a well-known theologian, say Christians have been called to do that. He was saying we're not called to join with a particular political party. That he thought that might be a big mistake. We're called to hold up what is right and good for all the political parties and for all Canadians, all American. He was an American, all across the board. And so we hold up the truth. And so the only question is, what is the best, most effective way of doing that? And these are strategies. Can we hold it up in a way that proclaims the truth, but still does it in a way that's gracious and appealing to people? That's got to be our goal. And I think there is a way to do what you're suggesting there, what you're asking about. But I would sure say we need to do it carefully. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot then. Yes.
Well, just on that note, I think we all look to Trinity and the stance that they take.
Yes. Yeah.
In terms of their operation and their picture around.
Right.
And so that's been an example.
Yeah, you bet. That's good. And I really take my hat. I'm part of the university. I'm not involved in that directly, but I take my hat off to the president, Bob Kuhn. And if you want to pray for Bob Kuhn and his team, I would really ask you to do that, because that has been an opportunity to put all this into practice. So you're trying to stand for what's right and what's good here, but do it in a way that doesn't gloat and that doesn't condemn and that kind of thing. So that's good. Yeah, thank you. Hey, listen.